各位傳媒
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending the 11 o'clock press conference. Apart from the Chief Executive, we also have the Secretary for Transport and Housing. We'll first hear from the Chief Executive and then the Secretary before they will take questions. Because of the epidemic, please stay socially distanced and keep your masks on. We'll first hear from the Chief Executive. Friends from the media, people of Hong Kong, good morning. Previously, I have already given you the heads up that within this week, we will elaborate on 3 areas of our work. Since the 19th of April, schools in Hong Kong will, in an orderly manner, resume face-to-face classes. I have already made the announcement with the Secretary for Education earlier on. And I'm happy to hear that basically schools welcome the idea and parents also warm to the idea that children can go back to school. But we ask you all to be vigilant in relation to personal anti-infection work. The second area of work is relating to the transport and housing. We have the Secretary here. After the 3-day RAT tests program, we have consolidated and reviewed the utilization of public facilities and relevant facilities. We've already decided to return 3 blocks of PRH units as well as some units under the transition housing for its users. In a few days, we will announce that starting from the 21st of April, in accordance with our guest schedule, over 3 months and 3 stages, we will relax social distancing measures. Tomorrow, together with the Secretary for Food and Health, I will give you the details. Before we delve into today's topic, I would like to make a few points. First, our work to allow Hong Kong to resume normal. There are risks. We're talking about resumption of our lives and our daily activities. We believe that there will be an increase in activity in our communities. Currently, the prevalent variant is still Omicron, which is highly transmissive. I'm afraid that there will be relevant transmission risks. Inevitably, with the relaxation of restrictions, there will be an increase in positive cases. As I've said, members of the public should continue to abide by personal protective measures. Once again, I appeal to those who have not been vaccinated and those who are suitable for the 3rd or the 4th booster jab, please do so. If you are vaccinated, the merit is that despite the increase in footfall after relaxation of social distancing measures, the risk of serious case is reduced if you are vaccinated. So you are protected, and in a way, you protect, in turn, our healthcare system. So if you are unvaccinated or if you have yet to receive a booster jab, please get your vaccination. The second point is that in our fight against the epidemic over 2 years, every decision has been difficult. So our anti-epidemic teams have seen the participation of various bureau secretaries and myself. Every time we take into account the views of stakeholders and members of the public, the result is that we arrive at a decision that meets our public health need, efficient, and it will also meet the need of our economic development as well as our wish to resume normal. But it comes with a cost. And we can't please everyone. The third point is that after every decision, there will be implementation and execution. And in every stage, we have to vigorously manage risks and put in place proper supporting measures. Say, for example, in the resumption of face-to-face classes, we have done a lot of work. We hope to make an announcement as soon as possible to give you time for preparation. I ask for your understanding that sometimes you wonder why relaxations and announcements could not be made earlier. It's because we have to put everything in place first. And I move on to two different matters. For the territory-wide RAT tests over the 8th and 9th as well as the 10th of April is completed, and we are in the middle of drawing a conclusion. And today we're going to talk to you about return of public housing units on the 2nd of April. We appeal to the public to support our territory-wide RAT tests over the weekend. There are three objectives. We conclude that these three objectives have been achieved. The first objective is to give us a better understanding of the overall infection situation of Hong Kong. Not many cases have been picked up in our exercise. And when we make our comparison of the latest day as well as as opposed to the 11th of March, we found that the pattern is rather consistent, whether it is in terms of the number of infected cases or other indicators that monitor the situation. There has been a drop of about 80 to 90%. Say, for example, number of positive cases. Even if we take into account the cases over 8th, 9th, and the 10th of April from the RAT test studies, 3,142 cases. I can't say that all of them were done as a result of our appeal, but all in all, the 3,142 out of these cases, over 60% of them are asymptomatic. I can say that because of our exercise, asymptomatic cases did their tests, and for the remaining 1,433 picked up on the 13th of April compared to the one on the 21st of March, 14,068 cases. There has been a drop by about 90%. When we look at other monitoring indicators, we see that they drop by about 90%. The first one is the regular sewage surveillance indicator. For the 2-day geometrical indicator, well, on the 12th of April compared to the 21st of March, it has dropped by 87%. The other indicator is in relation to lockdown exercises, RTDs, restrictions and testing declarations as a result of sewage surveillance. The number has also dropped similarly by 90%. On the 11th of April, we've only identified 8 cases compared to 295 cases picked up on the 21st of March. There's been a drop of 97%. The other one involves mobile sample collection stations as well as community testing centers. The number of cases confirmed as at the 11th of April is 1.03% compared to 7.35% on the 21st of March. There is a drop of 90%. If we look at other figures, say from the point prevalence rate done by Hong Kong U on the 21st of March is 1.82%. Yesterday, the 12th of April, is 0.32%, a drop by about 82%. So in relation to all these figures, we see a consistent picture that we have achieved. We have reached a stage when the pattern dropped by about 90%. So the first objective of the RAT exercise has been reached. And secondly, despite the drop in number of cases, we would like to pick out those who have been affected so that they can be sent to isolation centers to receive proper treatment. As I've said, over the 3-day exercise, the number of cases picked up on the platform amounts to 3,142 cases. They've all been sent isolation orders, and the 2,578 cases we have issued quarantine orders. As I've said, that over 2,000 cases are asymptomatic. You can imagine that these thousands of cases or close contacts, if they have not been picked out from this exercise, that means there will be more hidden transmission chains in our community. The third objective is to let members of the public to familiarize themselves with the use of RATs. There will be requirements of certain categories of people that would need to do regular RATs. So, for example, the DSE that will start on the 22nd of April. Everyday candidates will have to do RATs. And on starting from the 19th of April, by stages, classes will resume. Teachers and students will have to do daily RATs. And the other one is in relation to high-risk activities. With relaxations of measures, we may ask people who participate in high-risk activities to conduct RATs. So, I would like to thank everyone who participated in the territory-wide RAT exercise. That is over 1,000 voluntary workers, those who involved in the packaging of the service kits, organizations that lent us their premises, as well as civil servants. They help us to achieve these three objectives. And I would like to thank those who answered to our appeal to do the RATs over those 3 days. And I also appeal to members of the public to regularly or as and when needed, use RAT to see if they are infected by COVID-19.
Moving on to the next part is about our communication, isolation facility supply and utilization, so that we've been able to make use of them to come to a decision as to when we're going to hand those units back to the relevant authorities. And the purpose of such facilities would be for those who have been affected by the epidemic to be isolated in order to reduce the risk of transmission. We have not got many such facilities in place, but then since early February, when the number of infections went up very sharply, we started to make preparation for that. And we also asked the central government to help us with the installation or construction of such community isolation facilities. We also tried our best to increase the supply. And during this period, the community isolation facilities mainly came from these areas or sources. First, during the anti-epidemic period in Penny Bay and also the Lei Yue Mun resort, we also have about 3,300 such units. But then for the Penny Bay facility is going to be used as a special examination center for students who might need to use them. And also special facilities would also have to be set up for elders and also their carers who have to go into such facilities together. And also for infected children, and if their parents need to stay with them, then Penny Bay also has such special facilities to enable parents to go and stay there with their kids. And therefore, Penny Bay would also serve this function. And then during the DSE period, it would also be taking on another function. Second, the central authorities have assisted us on 6 sites in building the makeshift or the mobile cabin hospital. And within one unit, there would be more than one bed. And given the fact that the pressure is now reducing, we would not be placing strangers or people who don't know one another to stay in the same unit. And therefore, for such makeshift hospitals. We have a total of 5,000 such units, and it's already been in use. And they will also become the mainstream community isolation facilities that we will use in fighting the epidemic. Since the start of the fifth wave, 14,000 people have already gone into these makeshift hospitals for isolation. Third is commercial hotels. As you might recall, earlier on, when the situation was really very tight, I also called upon the hotel operators to make available their hotel rooms in order for us to use them as isolation facilities, and the response has been very enthusiastic. And with the drop in number of infections, many of these hotels have been used for other functions or purposes. So there are only 3 hotels left for isolation purposes, and about 1,700 such rooms have been put to such uses. And they've been used for care homes, residents, and also HA staff for isolation purposes, also for the teams from China to assist Hong Kong. They would also use these rooms for temporary stay, and also for those who have to go into hotel rooms for mandatory isolation, they would also use these rooms. And recently, 3 more hotels would also be used for designated quarantine hotels, and an additional 2,000 rooms would also be made available. So a total of 19 hotels, together with the 3 that were announced a couple of days ago. So 3 would be turned into designated quarantine hotels, supplying over 8,000 rooms for isolation or quarantine purposes. Fourthly, out of the 5 indoor stadiums, we have got this temporary holding centers for elders, and also for the AWE, and also at the Kai Tak Cruise Terminal. We also have this temporary holding centers for elders. A total of 2,900 beds would be made available, so that for infected elders, they can go into these facilities, and also for those who have already recovered but yet they are not suitable for going back to their care homes, they can also go into these facilities. And 2 public housing estates, 3 blocks, have been made available, and also 2 transitional housing estates have been used. Over 5,500 units have also been made available for those purposes. And after considering the changes in the epidemic situation, and also, as I said, the community isolation facilities are now more than adequate, and therefore would like to formally announce that the 5,500 units can also be handed back to those in need, and those who are on the waiting list, they can also be allocated those units. And I'll defer to the Secretary for Transport and Housing to give you the details. Thank you. Thank you, Chief Executive. As the Chief Executive just announced, with the consistent drop in the number of infection cases, and also to look at, after looking at the need for residents, starting from the end of April, for 3 blocks that have been converted into community isolation facilities. These are from the Queen's Hill estate, the Block 3 and Block 7, and also Lai King House. Some 3,000 units would also be handed back to the Housing Authority for allocation purposes. And also 2 transitional housing projects that have been used, including Tong Tau and also Kam Tin Kong Hawaii Estate. Some 2,500 units have been used, and starting from next week, they'd also be handed back to the relevant operators. That is the Sing Kong Hui charitable organization, and also the Pok Oi Hospital. And in the process, we will be removing the furniture items from the units, and they will be handed over to the other facilities for use. And for units that have been used for isolation purposes, there will be comprehensive and thorough sanitization. And then for the furniture items that have been used, and also suitable furniture items, they would also be given to the operators that have been running these units for free. Because as I said, such furniture items are basic furniture items, and then for families that would be using or moving into these units, they might still be able to use them. And also for the operators operating the transitional housing, they will immediately inspect the units, and then they would also start the furnishing of these units. And then for the converted facilities, because in the isolation facilities, there are some basic facilities and arrangements which might be somewhat different from public housing units. For example, they have this command center and also medical center, and also the storage areas for resources or materials and so on. They would also have to be reverted back to the original condition. And also for the individual units, they would also have to be inspected so that relevant alteration work will have to be carried out to ensure that for residents that are going to move in, they would be able to go in without any concerns. And they will start the works as soon as possible so that residents would be able to move in between late May and mid-June. As to Tong Sam Estate and also Kong Ha Wai Estate, these are the transitional housing projects, and their conditions will be carefully inspected so that they'll be reverted back to the original condition, and relevant repair and maintenance works will also be carried out. And the operators will continue to move on with the works that have been suspended because of the use of those estates for isolation purposes. For example, the relevant petitioning work and so on would continue so that those estates can be ready for intake of population by May. We understand that the whole situation has caused some inconvenience to those concerned. We call upon them to understand this, and in March we have already made use of the anti-epidemic fund so that for 12,000 people they have been given a one-off $8,000 extra payment. And in around May, about 600 households that have already signed a tenancy agreement with the operators, they would also be given this special allowance in order to make sure that they can benefit from this. The Housing Authority would also make special arrangements for those who have been affected. For example, for Queen's Hill Estate, Block 1, about 800 people have already been told that they would be allocated flats there, and new arrangements would also be made for residents to move into blocks 2 to 6 of Queen's Hill Estate, and they would also be able to take up the newly assigned or allocated units. And also for Hanking block, about 380 residents, well, several of them said that they would not be moving into Liking block, and arrangements would also be made for them to go into other units. Once again, I'd like to thank the Housing Department's colleagues, and also the Hong Kong Shen Kong Hui Charitable Unit, and also the Port Royal Hospital, because the construction teams and also the transitional housing dedicated team and also different departments of the government have been working very hard to coordinate this.
Now the floor is open for questions. Please raise your hand. If you are identified, please state your organization and use the microphone we give you. The lady at the back on my left. I'm News. First of all, I'd like to ask, in relation to the upcoming resumption of classes for primary and secondary schools, however, there is only 60% of vaccination amount at those age between 3 and 11. Some parents are worried that there may be side effects after vaccination, and it may cause some problems with the heart. That affects vaccination rate. And in other places, there are dedicated sites for vaccination for children, and they've been quite well received. Would you consider sending out outreach teams to boost the vaccination rate amongst children? Thank you for your question. Both of your questions are in relation to vaccination. Starting from late February, when we launched the vaccination program, We have left no stone unturned to boost the vaccination rate. We have been running some community vaccination centers. On top of outreach teams from hospitals and clinics, and in relation to elderly people, we send out teams to go to their homes to vaccinate them. So the Hong Kong SAR government attaches a lot of importance to vaccination because experts locally and overseas all say that if we are to combat the epidemic, the most important thing is to boost vaccination. Vaccination can prevent serious conditions. It means that we can reduce the number of people that would need admission to hospitals after infection. In turn, this will protect our healthcare system. Just now you mentioned about some figures which are quite accurate. For those between the age of 3 and 11, the vaccination rate for the first dose, as at last night, is about 62.9%. That means about 195,000 children aged between 3 and 11 are unvaccinated, not even one dose. And that is not ideal at all. But it's difficult for us to use legal means or ways like stopping them from going to school to get them to get vaccinated. We need to take into consideration the welfare and well-being of children. We will enhance our public education, publicity, and provide convenience for parents to take their children to get vaccinated. But apart from public education and publicity, we need to explain to parents that the side effects of vaccination and the merits of vaccination is not proportional. The merit outweighs the so-called side effects. We've provided a lot of data to show the difference between infection of children that have been vaccinated and those without vaccination. The number of cases, serious cases, is a huge difference, a difference of about 8 times. Professor Lau has said many times that it is important to get vaccinated. So I appeal to parents of unvaccinated children to get the information we have provided them and to give the children the protection they need. Well, starting from the 19th of April, children can go back to school. So parents need to get their children vaccinated as soon as possible. In relation to outreach teams to schools and other places, we are very willing to do that, and we have been doing such work. Secretary for Civil Service said that we have sufficient healthcare workers and vaccines waiting for people to get vaccinated. Thank you. Next question. At the front, the bespectacled gentleman. I'm from Mingpao. On the 6th of this month, the FEHD issued a summons to 6 customers who attended Wei Men Hong's birthday. Do they include government officials? Who are they? Does it include Mr. Casper Choi, the former Secretary for Home Affairs? And in relation to relaxation of social distancing, that is the 3rd stage, the 21st of June, does it mean that restrictions over eateries will be completely lifted? Is there any room for an earlier relaxation? What about other measures? the requirements of wearing masks and also prohibition of group gathering. Under what circumstance will they be released? Recently, we've seen an outbreak in Shanghai, and there were lockdown exercises. The problems came along with that because, say, for example, in terms of resources mismatch as well as some other chaotic situations. Well, if there is full lockdown in Hong Kong, do you reckon similar problems will arise? Well, are you glad that you put on hold the lockdown proposition? You've asked 3 questions. First, the FEHD, the Food and Environmental Hygiene Department, announced the law enforcement actions in relation to a birthday party. I'm going to comment on that. The law enforcement agency, i.e. FEHD, decides that it is appropriate not to announce the details of the individuals who've been issued summonses. Well, I don't think it's my place to announce these details. In relation to details of relaxation of social distancing measures, you'll have to wait till tomorrow. And as to whether there is any room to bring it forward, I'm afraid not. The earliest date is the 21st of April. We already have legal regulation issued by the Secretary for Food and Health. The social distancing measures in place have been extended to the 21st of April, so the earliest date for the first stage relaxation is the 21st of April. On the 21st of March, I announced that if there is no rebound and if there is a decreasing trend, we can have over 3 months by 3 stages relax these measures, and I refer to the majority of these measures. However, when it comes to wearing of masks and restrictions on certain activities, that would continue for quite some time. And as to how long that would continue, it depends on the epidemic situation in Hong Kong, development of COVID, as well as whether there will be new variants. So I can't give you details yet. We take into account the actual situation before we decide on any anti-epidemic measures. But whether it's in Hong Kong or in Shanghai, you can see that, well, Hong Kong is an inalienable part of China, so is Shanghai. So any city in China with a public health crisis or any outbreak, with the leadership of the central authorities, local governments would exhaust every avenue to seek support. In the case of Hong Kong, you can clearly see the care from our country, where we can now return public housing units and transitional housing to those in need, because with the help of central authorities, within a month, we have seen the construction of so many units in makeshift community isolation facilities. That is something that you need to bear in mind. That is something that happened during the epidemic. Thank you.
Next, please. On the right-hand side, the one at the front with the one in a light color shirt. Yes, well, for the community isolation facilities, there has been a reduction, but then many experts have said that we're going to have the 6th wave. So how are you going to deal with them? And also, mainly, you're asking the confirmed cases to stay home for isolation, and also elders would also be going into these temporary holding centers. Will they also be reverted to the original condition? And also, you're calling upon people and students to do the RAT tests. Many schools and also parents said that would be rather problematic. So when will that last? How long will that last? And also, can they also take the test once every few days? And also, for primary school students, they might not be able to take care of themselves very well. They sometimes forget to do their homework, not to mention the quick test. You said that they could also do the test at schools, and then schools said that it would not be appropriate. So does that mean that if they fail to take the test, they couldn't even attend classes? So can there be more flexibility in dealing with that? Thank you. 3 questions. First, on such social distancing facilities, and as I already explained in detail, for the different community isolation facilities, I've already told you what the conditions are, and I've already said that in the future, if there is a need for large number of people go into these facilities, then we would be mainly using the makeshift facilities built by the mainland teams. There are 6 such sites, so they are more than adequate right now. So even if there is a future outbreak, we will still be able to use them, because let's not forget that we have 3 community isolation facilities which have yet been commissioned. First is very close to the Kai Tak cruise terminal, we have one site. Next is phase 2 of Penny's Bay, and also the Lok Ma Chau Loop area. We have another site. So altogether, some 30,000 beds will be available. So the number would be smaller, because one unit will be housing several beds. So they should be more than adequate for us to cope with yet another wave of outbreak. Because of the 5th wave of outbreak, people are more used to the measures, the triage system introduced by the CHB for treatment and isolation. The first tier would be going to the hospital, second would be going to the AWE or the North Lantau Infection Control Center, and then those would be for the 2nd and 3rd tier. And then for the 4th tier, they can go into the community isolation facilities and also the elderly temporary holding centers. And if they can meet certain conditions, for example, if their personal condition is such that they do not have high risk and they do not have underlying diseases, and if their if their household environment is that they can stay home for isolation, and if they are able to take care of themselves, they can always stay home for isolation. So that has already enhanced our ability to cope with any further outbreak. And of course, I don't want to see that happen. And even if that happens, we have already taken on board a lot of experience. We should be able to cope with that, even if there should be another outbreak. And for units that can be handed back, we will try our best to hand them back, because they have their own uses. For example, hotels should be for hotels uses, and also even for sports stadiums, they should also be used for sports purposes. And therefore, wherever possible, we should use these public facilities for their own purposes, and we should hand them back as soon as possible. And as I said, some 5,500 public housing units will be handed back to the relevant authority, so that they can be used for allocation to those who have been waiting for their units in order to improve their living environment. Secondly, and the third question, they are both related to resumption of face-to-face classes. Definitely that would pose some risk, because there'll be people flow and there'll be gathering. And as you said, some young children might be very small and they are not able to wear their face masks properly. And when they're at schools, schools would also have to take care of them. Yes, schools would put in place relevant measures. Still, it's not foolproof. And therefore, on the one hand, we have to cater for the needs for children to receive education, and they would also have to go back to the schools so that they can also have some socializing opportunities. Still, we have to manage the risks, and we have already explained what we are going to do. And one of the measures that we are going to put in place is to ensure that on any particular day when the teachers and students go back to the schools, they have not been infected. The only thing that we can do to ensure that at the time when they go to the schools, they have not been affected. That is by way of doing the RAT test. If it's negative, then they can go back to schools. But then they should not be taking the test at too far an interval, because the incubation period for this variant is very short. So today you might be negative, but then it doesn't mean that tomorrow you will still be negative, and therefore taking on board the advice from the CHB at different stages. When we are just returning to normalcy, we would advise that people should take the test on a daily basis. So parents and students, during the last few days, that is from the 8th to the 10th of April, they should be used to taking the test on a daily basis. But then, as I said the other day, we are not asking the schools to do it on a daily basis until the summer holidays. Because, as we said, after a few weeks, we'll be reviewing the situation, including the frequency of taking the test. Has it got to be on a daily basis? And also who should be taking the test, who need not take the test. But then according to the experts, well, for those who have been vaccinated, they will still have a chance of infection. Or else we would not be telling you at the daily 4:30 press briefing that, well, out of those who have been infected, a number of people have taken just one jab, many have not been vaccinated, and so on and so forth. So vaccination doesn't mean that you would not get infected. It's just that you will not have very severe conditions, and also the hospitalization rate would be somewhat lower. So for those who have been vaccinated, if they can still get infected, and if we exempt them from taking the test, then for teachers and students who have been vaccinated, they might be bringing the positive variant back to the school with them. And then they would infect those who have not been vaccinated. And then the risk for those students who have not been vaccinated would be very high. So this is a very scientific piece of work. It's not an arbitrary decision. But then that would require all schools, teachers, and parents to work together with us. That's what we mean by working together, because as long as we can work together in solidarity, then we will be able to enable Hong Kong to go back to normal life again. Thank you.
기자가 대만.
Next question. On the right towards the back.
News. Mrs. Lam, Hong Kong has built more community isolation centers while cases are dwindling.
Sorry, can you speak slowly?
Sure. Hong Kong has built more community isolation centers even while cases are dwindling. So does this mean that you will be revoking home quarantine at some point and making all positive cases and close contacts go into these government facilities like the policy is on the mainland? And secondly, given the surge of cases in the mainland, is Hong Kong planning to review or suspend the quarantine-free return to Hong Kong and come to Hong Kong schemes, since under those schemes, people who have not visited medium and high-risk areas can still come into Hong Kong without hotel quarantine? And finally, nearly 60 airlines have triggered bans flying into Hong Kong since the start of this year. So the business community has said it still wants more certainty on flights and quarantine hotel rooms, even if Hong Kong residents need to quarantine for 7 days. So what more will the government do to bring clarity to the situation, including reviewing the flight suspension mechanism, and will the government consider implementing a closed-loop mechanism for foreign aircrew? Thank you.
Well, the several questions that you have raised. One is on the community isolation facilities. Yes, through the support of the Central People's Government and the joint efforts of the Hong Kong SAR government and the various sectors, the Housing Authority, the non-governmental organizations running the transitional housing projects, the hotel industry, we have built up a very good stock of CIF facilities, CIF units, which in light of the latest downward trend and the decrease in the number of confirmed cases, we have come to the conclusion that we have an adequate supply. And instead of preserving every CIF for anticipated use, because they are very limited resources that have other purposes, like hotel rooms should be for the arrivals, and housing units should be for people to improve their living conditions. So the government has been vigorously reviewing the situation, and as and when possible, we try to make adjustments to enable some of these facilities to be returned to their original purpose. So today, together with the Secretary for Transport and Housing, I am announcing that some 5,500 housing units in 3 blocks in 2 public housing estates, as well as 2 pretty large transitional housing projects will be returned, so that several thousands of families could improve their living conditions shortly. You asked the point about the isolation policy. We have experienced a huge surge in the 5th wave, and as a result, the Center for Health Protection has devised a very systematic and rational process to identify those who could be isolated at home, and those who need to be taken out of their home for community isolation or even hospitalization. So there is a very clear table on the Center of Health Protection website about what they call the triage mechanism and the tiered arrangements to arrange for isolation. So we think that this is a very rational approach, and there is no intention to change it again, because this will cause uncertainty and confusion to the people of Hong Kong. Now, in the mainland, yes, we still have schemes which allow people from the mainland, whether they are Hong Kong residents or non-Hong Kong residents, to come back to Hong Kong under the Return to Hong Kong scheme and to come to Hong Kong scheme. We will, of course, review the situation depending on a particular place in the mainland where there is higher risk. We will put in more precautions, like the negative PCR test upon arrival and so on. But the one important thing is in the mainland, they impose very strict rules to prevent people from an infected area to leave that area. So in a way, that has helped a lot of places, not just Hong Kong, but all over the world, that they are not sort of exporting infected cases to other parts of the country and also to the rest of the world. So for the time being, we feel that it is very appropriate to continue with these arrangements. But after all, the numbers are not great. Now, about flight suspension, I have the Secretary for Transport and Housing sitting next to me, who's also in charge of the aviation industry. This is still a very important component in our anti-epidemic strategy to reduce and prevent the importation of infected cases from outside Hong Kong. Because no matter how much we work and do and impose in terms of social distancing, if we kept on importing positive cases from outside of Hong Kong, that will bring risks to the people of Hong Kong. So we have managed to keep Hong Kong safe for a very long time in the last 2 years, and we will continue to do so. So we have no immediate plans to relax the route-specific flight suspension restrictions that we have introduced. But for those who could come back on these return flights, if they need more quarantine hotels for the 7-day quarantine, then we are supplying more hotels. Just last evening, we issued a press release to inform the public that another 3 extra designated another 3 hotels will become designated quarantine hotels, providing an extra 2,000 rooms for returnees to book, so that they can then board a flight and come back to Hong Kong. Thank you.
好，下一位記者提問。
Next question. The gentleman at the back in white. I'm from TVB. First of all, I'd like to ask in relation to community isolation facilities. We see the number of positive cases has dropped to about 1 to 2,000. So 1 or 2 sites of makeshift community facilities will suffice. Would you reduce the number of facilities and change the facilities at other sites to other uses for optimum utilization of resources? And we saw that there was a proposal to enhance the sewage system of PRH units. It was said that it was going to start in August. Is it going to be on schedule? Will it start in August? And I have a question for Mrs. Lam. On Monday, you talk about RAT for students. Kits will be distributed to those who are in need. But some political parties said that all students should be given test kits because it's something they need to go to school. And just now, Mrs. Lam said that after relaxation of restrictions, RAT may be required for high-risk activities. There will be a surge in demand, so would you consider distributing the kits to those who are required to do the tests? I will answer the first question before I defer to the Secretary. In relation to mainstream isolation facilities, there will be those at the 6 sites. They are newly constructed with the assistance of the central authorities. They can provide close to 5,000 units. That is over 17,000 beds. One unit comes with more than 1 bed. But we have this policy in place, which we have told the public that unless it's an extreme situation, we don't put strangers in the same units. So very often we see 1 unit housing only 1 person, but there are 3 beds. We have not used all the units at these 6 sites. But we don't need the sites for any other uses. So the best approach is to just reserve them. We move the people out and just put them on standby instead of dismantling them. The pandemic situation is still uncertain. The WHO is still of the view that COVID-19 is still a pandemic. You said that instead of running all 6, maybe several should be closed. Well, the Secretary for Transport and Housing will look into this. As far as I know, the utilization rate of these sites varies. And if it's too focused, it may cause operation problems. But I will leave it to the Security Bureau to look into this. And I can say that within the short term, we are not going to remove these facilities because we need to be prepared for a possible next wave.
On the third question, with regard to the distribution of RAT kits, I've heard such appeals, but then I'd like to reiterate one principle, and that would apply to many governments' functions or work. Well, public resources would be used in those most in need. I'm sure you would not be opposed to this principle because if everything is applied by the government, then we will not just be spending $600 billion a year. So these are public resources, and definitely they should be used in those most in need. And where should the line be drawn? Sometimes the line has to be drawn tighter. For example, when it comes to social welfare, it has to be very carefully used. And then even if the environment might be different, for example, for families with different economic backgrounds, well, for every year, every school term, well, whether or not they come from very affluent families, they would be given $2,500 as an allowance. And this would help them with getting some of these personal protective equipment. And for them to take the RAT on a daily basis, Every year, we do provide surgical masks for free. It's not distributed for free to everybody, even if this has been done for 2 years now. So they will only be given to those most in need. So that would be in line with what I just said. Public resources would be used in those most in need. On this occasion, providing RAT kits to the schools for free, it has been done in a most relaxed manner. Some 93 million such kits have been distributed to schools, and they are mostly distributed to CSSA families and also those who are getting full range textbook and also other allowances. It means that their family backgrounds are that they are in economic needs. And this time we are giving some 10 million such test kits to students in need. It's not just students from CSSA families, those who are getting the full rate and also the half rate textbook allowances. In other words, their families are also needy families. We believe that this is very appropriate. As I said, if everything is distributed for free to everybody, then that would have an impact on the financial position of the government, and if it's subject to a lot of pressure, ultimately it's the public who will be affected. At the end of the day, we would not be able to provide them with the much needed assistance. And today is the 13th of April, and for the 89 resource allocation centers, this is the last day when people can get those kits for free from these centers. And if parents have yet to get enough test kits for their children, they are welcome to go to these centers to get these kits or these packs for free. And in the last couple of days, 780,000 such packs have been distributed. And so long as you come in, we will not ask questions, and you just be given a pack. And therefore, if parents need to get those packs for the students or for the children to go back to schools, then they're welcome to do so. I'll defer to the STH now. Yes, during the past 2 years, looking at the epidemic situation, the HA has done a lot of work. What we are talking about is, for the 800,000 PRH households, and you're talking about more than 2 million people living in public housing estates. We have already completed the inspection of the external sewage pipes on public housing blocks, and also for indoor pipes, a lot of work has been done. But then since it involves going into the tenants' units, it's not that easy, and therefore we haven't completed the comprehensive inspection of all in-house or in-flat pipes. But then some tenants, as we have seen it, they might have altered and redirected the in-flat pipes. Some of them have been severed without proper installation. As a result of that, we have modified the merit point system, and as you said, we had to undertake this enhancement works for all public housing units in order to improve the condition, and we have also got special funding from the FC for this project, so that for households who have altered the pipes of their hand wash basin, and if they have been redirected to the U-shape or the U bend, then we would press ahead with the project as scheduled, because in light of the epidemic, we have seen the situation that there is a need for us to go by this. Thank you. This is the end of the press briefing. Thank you.